Welcome back to the Mature Male Podcast. I'm your host, Wes, a psychotherapist helping men mature through timeless wisdom and guidance. Today's guest is Matt Korn. Matt is a writer and creator of Dad-esque, a community focused on surviving and thriving as a lawyer dad. Through his Substack, he's building a supportive space for fathers in demanding legal careers who are navigating the challenges of work-life balance while celebrating the unique journey of being both a lawyer and a dad. Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Wes. I'm excited to chat with you again.
Yeah, me too. So you've created this community specifically for lawyer dads. What led you to recognize the need for this kind of support, especially in a world where there's abundant content for mothers, but considerably less for fathers?
Just as a little background, I have 4 children. My wife and I have 4 kids. We've got a 10-year-old MJ, a 7-year-old Joshua, a 4-year-old Caleb, and then our daughter Madison is 2. So we've got 3 biological boys. Our daughter's adopted. I love talking and writing about adoption. And I work at a large international employment law firm in South Carolina, one of our 40 offices. And so my job is demanding, and I work a lot. I work long hours. I travel for work. And through the over a decade, almost 15 years of practice, I've had, in 10 years of being a parent, I've had to learn how to try to manage being with my kids, but also doing a really good job at work and getting promoted up to a partner level. And so in the last year or two, I've noticed more guys who are having kids who are starting to try to grapple with that, right? And one example would be a guy that interviewed for a summer clerkship position. He actually has a kid while he's in law school. And I was like, man, I don't know how you do that. That's incredible. But he was like, you've got 4 kids. You're doing really well at the firm. Would you mind grabbing lunch and just talking to me about it? And so we sat down and had lunch, and he said, how do you do this? And I said, just sleep less than everybody else. And that's the easy answer, right? Like and it's not a very healthy answer. And so I said, well, let me actually go out there and see what resources I can find to help you. And I started looking. And since creating Dad-esque in January, I feel like I've now discovered there are resources for fathers online. There are some really, really good ones. They're not incredibly easy to find. They're not hitting you in the face all the time. And it takes intentionality to go find those. And through creating my thing, I've connected with a lot of these folks and some really good resources, but I didn't find anything for lawyer dads in particular. And for me, my wife and I run a small group at our church for married couples with kids. We've got some of these folks have been in our group for 5+ years, and we've developed great friendships. That's our church family. And I go to breakfast every Sunday morning at 6 at a diner in Lexington, South Carolina, with the guys, because we were trying to figure out when can we meet as fathers of young kids. And 6 a.m. on Sunday was the only time we could consistently or as more regularly meet than without interrupting the daily life. And so I meet with those guys, but they're not lawyers. And there are certain aspects of what we do as lawyers that it's just a different job, just in the way that I couldn't, some of them are engineers. I can't really understand what an engineer goes through day to day because I've never had that job. And it's similar for lawyers. It's similar for any profession, really. And so I wanted to create a space for that, for guys that are lawyers that are trying to manage 2 very demanding roles.
I appreciate the fact that you didn't compromise on trying to kind of fit a community into your actual life, but you realized what the particularities was of your life being a lawyer. And we'll get into that in a second, of how that job in particular is more demanding, let's say, than someone who works in other industries. It doesn't mean that it's more or less work or meaningful. It's just that different context, and how you were able to search and find other guys that it seems like really resonate with that particular way of seeing things in a way that you feel seen, in a way that, as much as you appreciate the guys at your church, they can't understand you in that particular way. So I'm curious, you mentioned that you have this demanding job. I'm going to assume for most of how long law has been around, it's been a demanding job. So that's expected. But I think something you've touched on before, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, are the demand of a father has increased in particular over the last 15 years. So I'm curious, already having the demanding law job, and then now over the last 15 years and 4 kids later, having the demands of a father uptick as well. How do you think those have changed from when right before you were a father to where you see now as far as those expectations increase?
And it's something we talk about a lot at Desk, and something I think about a lot. And I think that's why I'm seeing the need and the people that are joining is I do think there's this concept of modern fatherhood that I feel like the expectations have changed in terms of my level of involvement as a father versus 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. I don't get home from work and open the newspaper and have a glass of bourbon. In my mind, that's the stereotype, right? Is you get home and
Absolutely.
you have your like pipe cigar, you smoke and you're drinking a glass of bourbon. That's not my life. And I think the expectation has changed, but I think it's more than the expectation. I think desire has changed too for dads to want to be more involved, to want to be more intentionally spending time with their children, be more present at home. As I've been writing on Substack, and a lot of my Substack is content that I think it's about being a working lawyer dad, but it's a lot of it is applicable to any kind of working dad. And it's content that I do for the community as well through the Substack. But I think as I've been writing and reading more about this and setting up Google alerts for any kind of, working dad content that's out there, I saw maybe a few months ago, there was a guy who just went viral in England who talked about the phrase working dad, and how that was like kind of revolutionary. Like people use the term working mom a lot. The term working dad isn't used as much. And I think there's just this societal norm that, you're just a dad who works. But I think that's changing. And I see it with guys who are joining who are grappling with these questions, who are saying, I want to be successful at work, but I also want to be a good dad to my kids. I'm very fortunate. I had a really great dad growing up, and he was an outside salesperson, and so he controlled a lot of his schedule. And we had dinner together, almost every night, and so I had that growing up, and that was a great model for me, right? Like fortunately, I get to control at least certain aspects of my schedule when I'm not traveling, and I like to be home having dinner with my kids, and so I had that great model, but not everybody has that. But I think more and more guys who are having kids today want that, even if they didn't have that growing up. Even if they're looking at, you join a law firm as an associate, most typically you're in your kind of mid 20s. A few years later, you start having kids, or maybe you're in your early 30s having kids. And you look at the people that are a generation or two ahead of you in their careers, and, a lot of those folks weren't as present. They were really invested in job, travel. Certain areas of the law require more travel. And that's not to say you can't do that and be a good dad at all. It just, all of that requires a lot more intentionality. And in the time that you do have with your kids becomes even more important. You have to take those moments where you can.
What you mentioned about having a father as a good role model and example, which is unfortunately rare to have such a present father. I'm curious if you picked up on any, I'm going to assume subconscious lessons. I mean, even the fathers that are around, I think there's now a new level of, let's say, direct sharing from dads to want to communicate what it means to be a man, and in a more clear, concrete way, which before I think most dads would say, hey, I'm here for you, I love you, but just figure it out, you're kind of on your own. Maybe your dad did give you specific messages, so if he did, I'd be curious to hear those. But just by watching him, what are some things that maybe now as a father you're picking up on to say, man, I really appreciate how he did this, or how he handled this, or said this, or believed this? Anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as a dad, and you say like telling your kids, "I'm here for you, I love you." One of the things that's shocking to me every time I see it, and you see it on Substack a lot, like these people that say, like, I grew up with a dad who never told me he loved me.
Yeah,
And that's just like crazy to me. I tell my kids that multiple
it
times
is.
a day. My 4-year-old at one point said, "Dad, I know you don't have to tell me. I know you love me." And I'm like, that's what I want, right? Like, I want my kid to be like annoyed by how often I say that to him. And so I think it's that kind of stuff. My dad was always like around to, if I had something going on. He was not an emotional guy. I found for me, like when I had kids, like I'll watch movies now and I'll get choked. My wife will look at me and she's like, "Are you getting choked?" I don't know what it was about having kids, but I became way more emotional. But I think the definition of what's a guy, you don't have to be stoic all the time.
Mm.
There's some value in having, the ability to look at a situation rationally and without emotion, but it's okay to have emotion. I'm thinking back to just this weekend. I went on a retreat with 16 guys from my church. And our church is the largest Methodist church in South Carolina. It's called Mount Horeb. And this was the first time they'd ever done a men's retreat. So it was kind of like a beta test of like, is this going to work? What is this going to look like? And I mean, it was amazing. Just 16 guys. And I didn't know. I knew the pastor who invited me, and I didn't know any of the other guys. And these guys were open, vulnerable. We sat around a fire, guys praying for each other, guys crying, laughing, joking, all of the things. And it was so cool. And like one of the guys texted me this morning, it was just like, oh, man, I've been thinking a lot. We can definitely relate to, the challenges. One of the things that challenges, like I'm already a lawyer and a dad, and those are demanding things. And now I'm starting an online community, right, for other lawyer dads. So I'm adding one extra thing to the plate, but it's important. And it's important to me to have that space for people. But just going to that and seeing guys like open up, and I just think it's different. Like, right, like 20 years ago, I don't know, there were probably groups of guys that did stuff like that. But I think that's becoming more, I want to see more of that. Guys saying, guys crying is not like, it's not like you're a man, you should never cry. And that's something I think a lot of guys grew up hearing from their parent or their grandparent, like guys don't cry. And I'm even guilty of that. When my kids were young and they'd like fall down, I would say like, hey, you're fine. Just brush it off. You're fine. Just no need to cry. Like that, I'm even guilty of that with my kids. So I like think more intentionally about that when they're showing emotion. I will say this, and I don't think I said it earlier, but Dad-esque is as much for me as it is for the guys I'm creating it for. And I'm very much a work in progress. And emotional intelligence is not my strength. It's something I work on, and I'm reading books. That's how I learn things. I read books. And so I'm reading books about it. As I reflect back on like looking even at my kids, I want them to be comfortable, like having emotion, crying, and being excited. And so that's something I just think I had a great dad growing up. I think that even though I've seen just this swing towards just being more vulnerable as guys, like I love the concept of your podcast and all the stuff you're doing too. Is just having these discussions as guys is important.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm really struck by the point you make about the being emotionally intelligent. I think especially for you falling into these categories of a career that is more rational. I mean, obviously emotions are involved in the law, but at the end of the day, you have to see things for what they are objectively, and it's a lot of granulated information that you have to see in a more cut and dry manner. You're also, a Christian, which a lot of people would say religious people are more stoic and demanding. And I think what you're speaking to and shedding light on is this new way of seeing the stereotypes that people would say, oh, this guy's a Christian lawyer. There's no way he's prioritizing emotion. And I appreciate you bringing this forth as a priority to say, no, yes, I got those same messages growing up, but you get to decide if you believe those messages. And you have decided to say, yeah, I find myself sometimes subconsciously getting into it with the falling down example. And it's interesting you say that. I was talking to a researcher who says that by the time boys are age 2, they're receiving 50% less physical touch than girls. And even the messages of what you just said on the playground, a girl falls, the mom or the dad, honey, are you okay? Yes, I got you. Nurturing, a guy says it like you're saying, brush it off. And those things take time to unlearn because I as well grew up in that way of thinking. So I'm really encouraged and inspired that you have acknowledged the messaging you were given. Hey, this is just what it was, right? It's how people saw the world. It's how they communicated. And I'm going to prioritize handling that different. And your experience in the retreat is also powerful because it's one thing for you to think it's normal to express emotion and to cry, and especially to your wife. I think that's typical. I think most men would say, hey, I'm not very emotional, but when I am, it's pretty much with my wife, spouse. But getting in a space with other guys and seeing other guys get emotional, hearing other guys get real and share, I imagine why this experience was so powerful for you is because you witnessed that, but you also were able to participate and hold that space for another guy while they cried, while they laughed, while they got real and shared. And a special bond was formed that should be normal, but unfortunately we kind of see as a not one off, but just this mountain peak experience that we don't integrate into real life. And to your point about the community that you're creating, to me, that's your subconscious effort to take that spirit you experience in the men's group and start to see that play out more in this dad-esque community on a day-to-day experience. I'm curious because I know in this community you all share a variety of things, from getting personal and real about law stuff, but also about real life, right? I know you've
Yeah.
shared your personal journey. Hey, I messed up today. I did this today. So I'm curious, being in a profession with the long hours and high pressure, where so much of your focus isn't on emotional intelligence and has to be on your career, what strategies have you developed for balancing those work demands outside of traditional work time that allow you to set a boundary for work, get into the emotional, creative side of things as a husband and father and a creative?
One thing you said I wanted to share was this idea of connecting, and has been surprising to me. I was listening to a podcast or read something one time that talked about guys being uncomfortable even just asking another guy for their cell phone number. It's weird because like women do this all the time, right? They meet somebody, they're like, "Hey, let me put your number in my phone." It's like an awkward thing to ask another guy, like, "Can I get your cell phone number?" And it was, I think it was like a psychologist was saying, it's partly because men are conditioned to be self-reliant and to
Mm,
be the strong person that doesn't need help. That when you ask for somebody's cell phone number, you are implicitly acknowledging that at some point I might need your help, I might need your
yeah.
support. That seems, I'm not a psychologist, it seems reasonable to me to think that's part of it. But like even just this weekend, I told the pastor, I was like, I don't know any of these guys, I don't have their numbers. Can we like just all put down our numbers and circulate them so that we can stay connected after this 2-day thing? Because it's just awkward. It's still awkward for me. And one of the guys in our small group said, "Yeah, I was talking to him about this." And he's like, "Yeah, he's like, I play hockey with these guys. I know their wives' names, their kids' names. I know all about their families, but I don't have any of their phone numbers." And so I don't know. I'd encourage guys listening to, when you meet somebody that you think is cool and that you could connect with, to just go over that hurdle a little bit and say, let's just stay connected. So that was just something I was thinking about when you're talking.
Thanks for sharing that. That's some good practical wisdom. Again, something that when you break it down like you just did, totally normal, seems reasonable, but why do we don't have to make it weird,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I agree.
And that guy's probably thinking, I'd like to connect too, but it's funny. But anyway, so your question about like just strategies, I think back to like the first, in our community, I host the community on Mighty Networks, and we have 2 time a month Zoom meetings with the guys. And that's my favorite part, is because I think real life connection, talking to people. I can post blog posts and people read them, and I've had guys reach out to me and ask questions about them. Getting that real life, just talking to somebody face to face, has been huge. The first meeting I had, I was terrified. Like everybody, I said, let's all introduce ourselves. And I thought it would be like, "Hi, I'm Matt. I'm an employment lawyer. I'm in South Carolina. I got 4 kids and a wife." And then it would move to the next person. In an hour, and there was only like 8 or 10 guys there. In an hour, we almost didn't have time to finish because guys were talking for 5 or 10 minutes about just everything about their lives. I tried to model that. I was intentionally saying, I'm going to start, and I went way deeper than what I just expressed. But it was cool to see these guys open up, and through that, we've had discussions about this whole, you work a lot. How do you find that time? What are the strategies? And one of the things, or a couple things that we've talked about. One is like thinking to yourself, my workday doesn't end when I leave work, when I get home from work. My workday goes till my kids go to bed. And then it's time for me to relax or do whatever. Because if your mentality is, when I leave work, my work day is over and you get home, the tendency is, and I'm guilty of this myself, is to just sit down on the couch, just be exhausted from the day you've had. But if your mentality is, until my kids go to bed, I still need to be on. I still need to be, it's a different type of work. I hate even calling it work in a way, but it is like especially when you have young children, there's a work-like aspect to it. Like if you want to be an involved parent, it's going to take more of your energy when you get home. It's not just sitting on the couch scrolling your phone. It's, maybe we're playing a game. Maybe my kids really like Wheel of Fortune lately, so we all watch Wheel of Fortune together. But there's still that pull to, I can check some emails while we're watching. If I'm doing that, I'm not there with them. I'm not present. right? And so it's that I thought was helpful. Transitioning from work mode to home mode, I think is important. One thing I learned a long time ago was take 2 or 3 hours, put your phone. I have to like physically distance myself from my phone if I really want to be. I don't have email notifications on, but there's still that desire to pull out your phone and check. And so for a couple hours when I get home, it's going to be dinner, hanging out with the kids for a while, and then bedtime, bath time, bedtime, and then I can go back and check my emails. But um, for a time period, I had some anxiety, and I went to talk to a counselor a few times. And one of the more practical tips he gave me was get home and like at least change your clothes or take a shower, do something to transition yourself kind of physically from one space to another. So at a minimum, I do that. I change into like gym shorts and a t-shirt as soon as I get home. More for me, it's just comfort. But that transition, and I feel like for work from home dads, that can be even tougher, right? We've talked about that. Like if you're just transitioning out of your home office to real life with your kids, that can be even tougher. So you might have to like go take a walk around the block for 5 minutes just to get yourself into the different mode. So we talked about a lot of strategies like that. For me, like it's also for early in my career, I used to work a lot on the weekend, and I remember having a mentor, like another associate who was several years ahead of me and had kids that were older than mine. He's like, I don't know why you're in here every Saturday working. And his strategy was after the kids go to bed, he'd load up his laptop and get the work done. And for me, it was easier. I'm not a nighttime person, so it's easier just to do like half a day or a full day on Saturday if I needed to catch up. I've switched that, so now like I'll get up early before the kids, or I'll stay up late and do work. Being a lawyer at a private practice is not a 9 to 5 job, and so I can't come in at 9, leave at 5, get all my work done. It's not possible. And so there has to be some kind of like intentionality about how am I going to do this? And for me, it's become, I want to protect as much of my weekend time as I can, because that's the time I get to really spend with my family. And during the week, it's that 2 or 3 hour block. The other thing I do is I most times when I'm coming downtown for work, I will bring my kids to school. I drop my older kids go to elementary school, my younger kids to preschool, and I will bring them with me. And the preschool's at least a 20-minute drive from our house. So we get 20 minutes of listening to Disney music and singing along. There's a really awesome new Disney album with like punk rock versions of Disney songs
Oh,
that we really are enjoying right now. And so I get like that 20 minutes of extra time. I wrote about it in one of my blog posts of, I don't know, it was a miracle. We got to school, to their preschool, like 10 minutes early, which with 4 kids, we're almost never early. We're lucky if we're on time. And so we got there like 10 minutes early, and I was like, I could sit here. They're listening to music. They're in their car seats. They could just hang out. I could check some emails, do whatever I needed to do for 10 minutes. But I was like, I just that day I was like, we could go to the playground for 10 minutes. And it's not a long time. But for my kids, that was awesome. That I was like, do you guys want to go to the playground? And they're like, yeah. For me, it was awesome. That's the best part of my day. And it was just one little choice that I made that I haven't made every time. But on that day, I made that little choice. So it's stuff like that for me, is like finding those moments with kids, and doing this community makes me think about being a dad every day. It doesn't mean I'm a perfect dad. It doesn't mean I don't make a ton of my fair share of mistakes, but it makes me think about it. And I think the more if you're thinking about something on a daily basis, you're being more intentional.
wow, that last line there, if you're thinking about something every day, you're intentional. Yeah, that's very true. And I'd like to unpack this concept of continuing the work or seeing parenting as a job. I agree. There's this new language floating around the internet for that moms, it's unpaid work, and starting to name, okay, this is work, but it's unpaid. There's a lot of debate about how to break that down and interpret it. But I resonate with this mindset shift that is required from going from your day job to realizing your job as a husband primarily, and then secondarily as a father. And I only have one kid, and he just turned 1, and I find myself struggling with the same thing. I get home or finish work and I think, I just want to do this, whether it's related to work or a creative project or an interest of something. And I struggle, I think a lot more than my wife, of trying to justify it subtly. And you had said that you've done this too, right? Where you say it's just 10 minutes. I'm just checking one email. I'm just going to do this. I think you're right, though. Those little moments are where the rubber meets the road to ask yourself, what's most important in this moment? And what can you not get back? You can always check the email. You can always go and do another creative act or, doom scroll, whatever later. But those 10 minutes with your kids, I'm sure in the blink of an eye, they'll be going off to college and you'll be begging, please spend 10
Yeah.
minutes, call me. So on that note, I know many studies show that women still shoulder most of that cognitive load in parenting. What does true partnership look like beyond the surface level task sharing of splitting up? You do this, I do this. Let's say like reading to kids before bed. I know you had mentioned stuff like that and the Disney sing along. I'm sure you could sing some bangers for us if we
You don't
ask,
want to
but
hear that.
I won't ask you. But you've talked about how a wife can be both a mirror and a checkmate for men. I love that analogy of they're both a reflection and they're the accountability. So I'm wondering if you could expand on that concept and your experience of how your wife has been a reflection and an accountability, and why that kind of honest feedback is so crucial. Maybe in those moments where she said, Matt, like, you're checking the email, put it down. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah, so many good things to talk about. One thing you touched on was bedtime stories. I don't want to forget this part of it, but I posted once. I read some study that talked about it was from like Leeds University in England, and it talked about when dads read to their kids when they're young. There's like a measurable increase in their children in like the 5 to 9 year old range in academic performance. So there is
Oh,
actually like there's research out there supporting the idea that fathers really should read to their kids. It's not to say mothers shouldn't either, but fathers really do need to do that. Sometimes I think some dads might view that as like mom's going to put the kids to bed and read to them, but I really try, no matter our schedules. We're like a lot of parents are like 7:30 bedtime, kids are in bed at 8. I'm not good at that, and it's partly because I mean like I work till 6 most days. I get home at 6:30. We eat dinner. It's 8:30 before we're even starting the whole bedtime routines, and then when we got activities thrown in on that, sometimes it's after 9, and so our schedule is just a little bit different, maybe than some other parents that are able to be more measured in their approach on that. But I really try to read to my kids at night, and sometimes that's like with my daughter first, then my 4 year old, then my older children. So I'm going through like 3 rounds of reading, but I really try to do that. I love reading myself, and I want my kids to love reading. So, um, but in terms of the my wife, one, she's awesome, and she was naturally just way more prepared and a better parent than I was from the get go. She always, I don't think I'll ever catch up in that race. But I read another study, and I wrote a blog, but my post on this is called "Lawyer Dads, It's Time to Step Up," because this is something that was really helpful to me, and for many years, and still to this day, it's hard. Is a guy who's out there, like I'm working hard at work and providing. My wife decided she wanted to stay home with our kids, which is a huge blessing to them. And when I often fall into this trap of thinking that I think it's in my mind now, I've come to the point where I think I overvalue my contributions and undervalue hers. And that's really been tough in a lot of cases because it leads to conflict where I think the things I'm doing at work, the things I'm doing to provide for our family financially are more important than the domestic tasks that she's doing day to day. So this Lawyer Dad's Time to Step Up article, is article I read about sharing that domestic cognitive load, and women even today. I think we've made strides towards a more equal partnership. There's a lot of work to do because women shoulder a much more significant portion of that domestic cognitive load. And again, I'm probably butchering all this because I'm a non-psychologist, but what I took from it as a lay person is when I look at, making lunches for my kids, let's use that as an example. I just look at it as making a lunch, and it's a task that I can do in 5 or 10 minutes. And some days I'm trying to make my share of lunch is, and I view that as splitting it, but I'm only splitting the task of actually making the lunch. I'm not the one thinking about who's got to buy all the food to make sure we have the food to make the lunches. I'm not the one thinking about our kids eating as healthy as they should be. Are there things that we're giving them? My daughter has allergies, and she's allergic to eggs, peanuts, and now tree nuts. And so I'm thinking about allergens and all the things that go into that. That's just one small example, but everything is like that. I think of like folding laundry. That feels like a task to most guys. It's just like there's a task of fold the laundry, put it away. But I'm not thinking about like having to go through all those clothes and make sure that we're rotating out clothes that no longer fit and getting new clothes that do fit and worrying our kids, do they have the right clothes? Do they have enough long? My kids hate long pants for some reason. Always have. Like they just want to wear shorts. Maybe it's because we live in South Carolina, but they want to wear shorts all the time. But like making sure they have appropriate clothes and that they're ready to go, and that it's, hey, by the way, it's Thursday is pitcher day at school, so they need to have their pair of khakis cleaned. And um, my wife does most of that stuff, and if I just think of it as just doing the laundry, it's easy for me to overvalue what I do. If I start thinking about all that goes into all that, doctor's appointments are another really good one. Sometimes I'm fortunate, my wife takes them to most of their doctor's appointments, but there's so much that goes on with that, especially when you have four. And so that really struck me as something where a lot of the conflict we've had around parenting is really born out of that, where I view it as like, hey, if I change a few diapers and I help make breakfast in the morning and I drive my kids to school, like I've done my half of the parenting role. I really haven't. And again, like if my wife was listening to this, she'd probably be like, you still got to do work. She's awesome. She would say something complimentary, but say there's still work to be done. And I think that's right. And I think that if guys take that mentality of like a continual improvement, again, even just talking about it now, I'm thinking of like three things that I could probably be more helpful in or value more. And so it's just, that's what I love about this. I love like the community feel that we have and the guys just coming into these meetings, talking about it and writing about it on Substack. Has been awesome. Seeing other guys that are writing. I do think there needs to be more. I think there needs to be more because I think people are looking for this. One of the things I do is I have a dad law library, I call it, but it's like a curated list of podcasts, blogs, articles, and studies that I've looked at and found. And then I'll give like a short summary. But I think there's guys out there who want to learn more about this stuff, but finding podcasts, to me, it's like watching Netflix with your wife. You sit down on the couch and you take so long picking whatever you're going to watch that you then are too tired to watch the show that you just spent an hour trying to decide on. And that's how I feel about podcasts too. For me, I spend an hour of my time like trying to figure out what's the right podcast and the right episode that I need to watch or listen to right now. So I'm trying to curate that a little bit for dads to find some stuff. Dads in my community and say like, hey, look, I've listened to this podcast. It's good. It's worth your time. So save some of that time. But the more people are talking about dad stuff, the more it'll be easier to find. But it can feel like you're trying to like dig through things to find it sometimes.
Absolutely. And what you said earlier struck deep about wanting to give yourself more credit for more or less doing what would be considered an equal amount of work. I always like to ask my wife to pin a badge of honor on me because I did the dishes, and I'm like, why is there not a round of applause here, And I do think I find that is true for dads. I think it's true for husbands. And I work with couples, and it's true for people who are even just dating, cohabitating, and the way that a guy I like that framework you use, that we're so task oriented. Okay, it's just a objective task. I need to do it. How long is it going to take? Great, I'll do it. But we miss the consideration, the intentionality. Really, the empathy is the emotional skill there of saying, what would it be like to be someone else, and what would they need that I could help provide? And I think those questions are things that moms are always thinking about, probably to a fault, right? I mean, I don't know about your wife, but I know mine can sometimes struggle with, okay, that's like too considerate though. And as a guy, that's where we have a skill, I think, is to be a little less agreeable, a little more selfish. Sometimes that's not bad, saying, take a step back. That is too much. You've done too much, that kind of thing. But I think in most cases here, you're right. Most of us, it takes an active effort to come home and say, okay, the work hat is still on. I'm being the dad, yes, I have these tasks I need to do, but what else could I reasonably consider where it's not like I'm doing my wife's job, but I would certainly make it easier. And a suggestion here on mine that could be helpful, and I'm curious if you do some version of this, is, I have a weekly meeting with my wife. We talk about budget, we talk about to-dos, we talk about scheduling. And that is, having a weekly touch point is the perfect time to address issues, whether that's with you or with her. And if that's with the issue lies with you, to say, okay, it's Sunday night and we're talking about, hey, I feel like lately when you've dropped the kids off, you've just rushed, and then I've kind of left doing this or that, or you spring a work meeting on me last minute and it spills into dinner, then I have to end up cooking. Or maybe it's the reverse. You say, hey, you've been a little confusing. I feel like you've gotten upset at me for not doing this, but I wasn't expecting to have to do that. And just having the time to actually sort out and talk through the things that are not so straightforward. I mean, as much as we want to assume this person gets me, they're the love of my life, we're on the same page, there requires this active effort of communication. And I think you have spoke to an effective version of that in the moment that your wife does, to say, hey, she seems to be thankful for what you do. I think that is a start. I think when you start to get resentful, you stop being thankful. So I think starting with saying, I appreciate you doing all this, and this sort of the accountability, that checkmate comes in. Maybe there is some more to do, and the mirror comes in reflecting, do you think there's more to do? Which is always a trick question. But anyways, yeah, I'm just curious if you have some form of that with your wife, a touch point, or how you all talk about those things as far as feedback and changing roles and responsibilities on how each of you may do the job you feel called to as a parent.
Yeah, so we don't have a weekly check-in, although that's an awesome idea, and I'm probably suggest it to her later. And I love that you're developing that habit now. If you guys are gonna have more than one kid, like, develop that habit now, because it's gonna be harder. There's just more, and I had this thought the other day. I was thinking back to when I was a lawyer without children, and I was like, I was still stressed. This is a hard job, whether you got kids or not, whether you're married or not, you got kids or not. It's a hard job. And so I was like, I had stress then in my life. And then I had children, and I was like, man, this is even harder. Like, this is more stressful. And then I thought about it the other day. I was like, now I have a 10-year-old who's like involved in all these activities. And I know that until they're all leaving the house, there's still going to be just demands on the time. And I should be like living in today, in this moment, saying, I'm grateful that I have this time. My 10-year-old and I have started going on walks a few times a week, in the morning before school, just the two of us. And it's been awesome. I still have this time with him once a day. And that might not be the case when he's in high school. And then when I was on the retreat, a guy was like, hey, by the way, once your kids leave the house, it's not like you're going to have bundles of free time where you're just like spending 3 hours a day reading and stuff. Life is still busy. There are still things going on, right? So I think, like, in my mind, like, living in the moment, but developing that habit is very impressive. And I wish we had done something more intentional like that. We tend to, like, we'll try to do date nights, where it's just the two of us. Now it's finding childcare for 4 kids can be tough. Her mother lives 8 miles down the road, and I don't think we had hired a babysitter for the first 7 years of having children, which is incredible. Now it's a lot. It's a lot to ask of her, and she loves her grandkids, and she is still super helpful. But now we've started having to hire babysitters for when we want to go out and stuff, and finding people to do that is tough. But when we do go out on date nights, that's a lot of times the times where we have that time to just like really reflect on what's going well, what's not. I think too often we let it get to a boiling point of like, it's just, we can't proceed without having that discussion. So I love that you do it once a week. For us, it's been, it's when we can find that time, to just be the two of us. Because sometimes it's like we've worked all day, the kids go to bed, and we're just exhausted. Actually, coming out of the retreat, I said, I think we should start trying to, after the kids go to bed, just sit out on the porch for 20 minutes and just talk. Because I feel like that's one area where I could improve. I feel like that we too often, the kids go to bed and then we like turn on a TV show or something. We just both need to just like relax, veg out for a little bit, where we could probably be more intentional about that. So I like the weekly check-in. I think that's, with our schedules, it's tough to like protect that time, but it's important. like the times where we do have those conversations, things go better. The times where we are more on the same page, because and again, I think it's my recognition of the amount of like what I now think of as like invisible work that I can't see being done that's going on in her head all the time. And similarly, same thing. Like I think she has an appreciation of my job doesn't end when I leave the office. I'm thinking about that brief or that case or that client need while we're sitting there having dinner. Like she can tell sometimes. She's like, "What's going on?" And I'll be like, "I'm just thinking about work." And it, like that part's still, I'm still trying to figure out how to turn that off. But that you think about it even when you're not at the desk. And I know I think where I'm getting to is I'm now realizing there's things she's thinking about when she's not at her job. She's sitting there at dinner thinking about all the things she's got to do for our kids or for herself or for, I mean, she's an incredibly like helpful person. All her friends that she's helping or supporting in some way. So um, yeah, I wish I was like, I have this great system. I don't, but I think that's real life. I think probably most of the guys listening to this don't have a great
Yeah.
system set up. And there's like, again, having this conversation, like every conversation I have with a guy about being a dad, I try to take away something where I'm like, that'd be cool to try. I mean, see if that works for us. And maybe every week doesn't work for our family, but some other iteration of that works.
Well, don't give me too much credit. I've hit the boiling point to have that need. So if it's of any solace to you, I'm seems like I'm certainly hitting my boiling point much more than you are to require these weekly meetings. So, but I like what you said that it is real life. That, I mean, even though we have those, for instance, we haven't had it this week because life just gets in the way. And again, to your credit, you got 4 kids. I only have one, and I still can't make it happen. But I appreciate what you just said about that your wife is still thinking about her job as a mom when she's not actively doing that, whether it's at dinner time, etc. And same with you. And I think what you're getting at is the ability to understand where someone's coming from. And your wife asking you what's going on, that's the invitation to understanding each other. And it doesn't mean it excuses it. I imagine it doesn't, you're not given the green light to be like, great, now I can keep thinking about work. It almost is a compassionate pause for you to stop and be like, yeah, okay, I just want to name this. I feel safe enough to tell my wife that. I mean, a lot of guys feel embarrassed or shameful or weird just saying, well, it's just an emotion or it's just a thought. What does it matter? But in that moment, it's so important because it's the difference between your wife thinking he doesn't care, he's tuned out, he's checked out, to I can understand why he's thinking about that case. That's a really important thing to him, because she's doing the same in her own way. So I like that. And then the date nights, I agree. I think I see it a lot like a timeout in a sports game. You have a dedicated pause to revisit, to understand, okay, how's the strategy worked this week? What can we do better? But it's also a time to connect emotionally, to check back in, because again, I only have 1 kid. I find myself doing this. Well, the date night can wait because the priority is the kid and all these other things. The next thing you know, it's been 2-3 weeks since we've had intentional time, and you start to be two ships in the night that are passing instead of finding intentional time to connect. And I like what you said, that there will always be a reason to not prioritize your marriage and to do other things, because in the moment you do experience less stress by not pushing back and fighting for that time. But ultimately, it's a subtle disconnect between you and your person. And that is the foundation and the bedrock for being a parent, is if your marriage is right and solid. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that. Once you add more responsibilities, it's easy to get fixated on taking care of those, 1 kid, 2, 3, 4 kids. But maintaining the integrity of that initial bond and commitment and sacrament that you made with your wife's so important. So I appreciate you naming that, because I think it's a good reminder for guys to think, if you want to be a good father, if you want to show up for your kids, have that check-in with your wife and see that just as important, and not just as someone you want to get to do things or to take things off your plate. Of
Yeah.
course, the selfish side of us wants to do that. But yeah, all that stuff's so good, man. So I just appreciate all your thoughts. I think it's very helpful. You've given so much wisdom today out of like myself, being an average Joe, out there just trying his best, starting this community amidst, being a lawyer. And I just appreciate the realness and the rawness that you've shared, but in a way that has given us things to think about, because you said this towards the end about most guys not having a system organization. I think most guys want to feel like it's relatable. I think a lot of the content about discipline is coming from guys who spent careers in the military. I can't
Yeah.
relate to that. It's not going to work well for me. And your reflection on starting a community for guys to talk about real life jobs and real life scenarios with real life shortcomings, I think is the start. So I don't want to assume, but I think the Dadesk is the place people can find you. Can you tell specifically what that would look like, and anything else you would like to leave us with to check out?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. And so I've got the Substack. It's dad, comma ESQ on Substack. I do a lot on LinkedIn. A lot of my content's on LinkedIn because before I started Desk, I was the lawyer who said I don't do social media other than LinkedIn because most lawyers want to be expanding their business network. And so I do a lot on LinkedIn. That's where I meet a lot of new members, people that are interested in it. So I have a Desk company page, and then just I share some things through my individual page too on LinkedIn. I have an Instagram that's just kind of fun. All of it's dad Esquire. Like the Instagram's dad underscore Esquire. So that's just kind of fun. I post like fun videos of my kids. I have one video that got crazy. Like for me, 750,000 views, crazy number of views. And it was the silliest video ever. I made it in like 5 minutes on a Saturday. It was my wife and I were racing to get to IHOP with our kids in two different cars. We had two different cars for some reason that day. Our kids always want to see whose car's faster. So I posted this thing with Fast and the Furious and Vin Diesel and Paul Walker. Just it said, "Are you even a real dad if you haven't raced your wife home so your kids could see which car's faster?" And that thing blew up. So that it's more fun stuff like that. And then the community itself, there's a webpage, dadesq.com. And then if you're a lawyer dad and you want to join, it's dadesq.mn for mightynetworks.co. That's the place where like all the stuff happens. I got a lot of people think my LinkedIn page is the community, and it's not. I actually had to post like guys because I've talked to attorneys at my firm even who are like, I think I'm in Dadesk, and I was like, no, you follow the LinkedIn page. But the
Big
actual
difference.
community itself is hosted on Mighty Networks. If there's lawyer dads listening, love for you to join it. There's a lot of guys that I think follow my Substack or my LinkedIn page because a lot of the content's just working dad stuff, and you're going to see some like lawyer jokes. Lawyer dad jokes are the best because dad jokes are already great, and then lawyer dad jokes are even better. So you'll see some of that stuff on there. But I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to say all that, and this has been cool just talking through. And again, I take away a couple things from our conversation today that I'll chat with my wife about and see what she thinks.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, I agree. I think you've said this throughout the conversation. It's important to keep top of mind is just having the conversation gets us so far, because that's where the natural wisdom and guidance does come up in a unassuming way. As you were sharing a lot of things today, I thought, oh my goodness, yeah, I need to think about that. I could do that different. This would really help. So I agree. I think just the conversation helps. And I appreciate you making a space for guys that have high demand jobs. I think that's going to draw a lot of people because a lot of men fall into that category while also truly desiring to be good husbands and fathers to their kids. And I think there's a outdated stereotype that if you work a high demanding job, you don't care about anything else, or you most care about that. And I appreciate you breaking that stereotype to say, no, that's not true. I feel called to work this job. It feels meaningful, and it has its place amidst the other really meaningful jobs that I have, and it allows me to juggle all the balls in the air. So thank you
You're
for
with
the work that you're doing, Matt, and I appreciate you taking the time today. So I'll put everything in the show notes. And guys, until next time.